Dive into the wonderful world of chorus today. And while I'm going to be using my Axe effects for all of these examples, you can apply these techniques, tips, and tricks to everything from a straightforward two-knob chorus pedal through to any other modeler or plugin. Before we get started though, I've got my Tyler JTG plugged into my Axe effects. I'm using a stereo pair of these ODS 100 clean amps with a free IR of an EV loaded boogie cab that I made. This is totally dry on the neck and middle pickup. I'm, of course, contractually obliged to play that Alex Lifeson chord in there when demoing modulation. So let's talk about what chorus actually is. And you will see varying descriptions on the internet and in other pieces of literature about this. But all a chorus is a very short modulated delay. So first element in there, a short delay. We can add a short delay in here with our Axe effects. Let's use, say, a 12 millisecond delay in here and have a listen to what it does to the clean sound. I could vary that delay time and get essentially the same sort of effect, just with a slightly different character. It doesn't sound like a chorus because there's no modulation or wobble in there. I've just got this kind of hollow sounding doubling effect in there. So if I want a chorus, I need that short delay to modulate, or I need its delay time to change. So I have set this up really simply using an advanced feature of the Axe effects where I can sweep this delay time from 11 to 15 milliseconds. And now it sounds like this. That sounds like a chorus right now, because it is. We are modulating a very short delay in there. My video editor just made a very good point. As that delay time changes, it creates a change in pitch, which is why you hear that pitch shifting effect in a chorus. Back to it. What we should talk about are the most common chorus controls that you will see. And then we'll go from a delay block over to a dedicated chorus block that has all of those controls baked in. So the minimum to maximum delay time, that range on there, is called the depth of our chorus. So the times that it is sweeping between, it might be a really large range, it might be a really small range, is often referred to as the depth. And then the speed at which we sweep from that minimum to maximum delay time often gets called the rate. So we've got rate and depth, and they are related to one another on there. If I change the range of these delay times on here, let's say I go up to around 40 milliseconds and I go down to 1 millisecond, this chorus effect is going to be a lot more pronounced. If I have a much smaller range or a much lower depth, I get this. So there is an interplay between the depth, or the difference between the minimum and maximum times, the rate, which is how fast we're sweeping between them, and essentially that center point between the minimum and maximum times. You heard in there, I've got a 2 millisecond depth, but the minimum delay time is 1 millisecond. That's going to sound different to having the minimum delay time as, say, 20 milliseconds and going up to 22 milliseconds. We should hear that. Hopefully that will serve as a good introduction to the idea of rate, depth, and how important the delay time is, because with those very low delay times, we got a much more almost metallic or hollow sound out of the chorus. Centering the delay time around 20 milliseconds, for example, had a much smoother and warmer sound to it. Now, they are very subjective terms, and I wouldn't say that that's a given rule where short delay times and long delay times determine everything about a chorus effect, but they are a good starting point. So we should move over to the chorus block now. And one nice thing about a modern modeler, like a fractal or something you would see on, say, a quad cortex or a helix, are various types of chorus in here. So sort of chorus presets, which often will set out to emulate classic hardware effects. whether they're pedals, old rack units, or plugins. So you can see a bunch of different types in here on the Axe effects. I'm going to start with the analog stereo. There's often a mono version of a lot of these types as well. And in particular, for the fractal unit, that just depends about what is happening at the input of the effect. You can use any of these effect types in a mono setup. You just run them into a single amp and cab and they will sound totally fine. But a lot of the time what's going to happen with the stereo effect types is they won't sum the input to mono at the start of the block. And furthermore, they will have an offset with the modulation. So the left channel will have the delay time increasing while the right channel has the delay time decreasing, and vice versa. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that's a good way to think about it. So if you are running a stereo setup, you probably want to use a stereo chorus as a starting point. It will get you there quicker. But as we'll hear, there's lots of different ways to get a stereo effect or some extra width out of a mono chorus type in here. So very quickly, the first thing that I want to talk about is placement. I'm using quite a clean, it's getting to an edge of breakup sound on there, and I'm running the chorus before a pair of amps on there. So let's have a listen to the exact same settings, analog stereo at the stock settings, pre or post. And we'll use a clean sound and then we'll use a distorted sound. Differences with a cleaner sound were quite subtle, and I would say if you were just using, say, a single amp and cab, you're just going to be making a decision about whether the output is often just going to be all mono, where you run a chorus into a mono amp and cab, or whether you want some stereo spread, in which case you could just put a stereo chorus type after the amp and cab, and it's going to sound nice and wide. With distortion, however, I think I much prefer having it after distortion for rhythm guitar work, where I'm using it like a doubler or a stereo expander, but I do like it in front of a distorted amp if I'm going for more extreme wobbly settings. So we'll have a listen to some of those if I'm going for like a rotary speaker or a Univibe style tone on there. It just kind of adds this very cool, chewy, murky texture to everything that I definitely appreciate. So one thing that is specific to the fractal units, which I think is really cool, is this auto depth feature. So we can just choose an effect type and use the rate and depth. Now we heard when I had my delay example on there that as I increased the depth with a given rate, it can start to sound really out of tune, and it gives you that classic seasick sound that I think a lot of people who say they don't like chorus associate with chorus. Well, if we turn auto depth off, we will certainly get that seasick sound here. However, we've got two settings in here, high and low, which will essentially scale the depth control for a given rate on there. So if you want a really, say, wobbly chorus, let's turn the rate up around 6 Hertz on here, and we want the depth to not get too crazy. We still want to be able to actually hear our core guitar sound in there without it being totally washed out. We can just set auto depth to low or high. So I'll start with it off, and this is going to sound pretty messed up. That is a very cool feature on the Axe effects that I really appreciate. To me, that makes getting a really musical and sort of more subdued, subtle chorus effect really easy, no matter where you set the rate and the depth. And I think 95% of the time, you can get a really satisfying chorus effect by just playing with the type. So select a type of chorus that you think you might like, and then tweak the rate and the depth. And a really good rule of thumb is like, as the rate goes down, the depth can come up. And as the rate goes up, the depth can come down a little bit. So if you don't have that auto depth function on your unit, or even on the Axe effects, I still actually kind of set auto depth a lot of the time to high and then just scale those two controls. So I might have depth right up on here with a low rate and vice versa. Another really important control in here, again, aside from the type, the depth, the rate, and that delay time that we talked about. And really, when we select a type, a lot of the time, we're selecting like a preset delay time and a bunch of other parameters on there. So I'll lump those together. We're going to talk about the LFO type on here. So we've talked about the depth being the minimum to maximum delay time, and the rate or the speed is how quickly we change or modulate between them. The LFO type is going to control what the shape of that movement looks like. Now, the classic idealized way to do this is with a sine wave. This is just going to move smoothly from the maximum to minimum value. However, a lot of older analog pedals would use a triangle waveform a lot of the time because it was probably easier to generate a triangle low frequency oscillator than a perfect sine wave on them. And there's all points in between, like the A-stable is kind of a mix between the sine and the triangle. There's a square wave in there, which will sound quite glitchy. The trapezoid, which is here, is kind of like a weird cross between the triangle and the square wave. We've got an up and down saw wave in there. We've got exponential and logarithmic waveforms, and we've even got a random waveform in here. So let's just have a listen to the difference between a bunch of those. I'll have auto depth on high, so I get a nice accentuated effect in here, and I'll set the rate, I don't know, around 2 Hertz on there. I'm gonna play the Lifeson chord again. If you don't like this chord, it means you probably don't like Rush, and that just breaks my heart. My personal favorite is the A-stable waveform in there. It's a really nice mix between the sine wave and the triangle wave, and gets pretty close to what some old analog hardware was doing. And a bunch of the effects in my blocks library, which I'll link in the video description, use this LFO type in there to cop some of that old school analog behavior. Now, we should talk about stereo imaging on here. I've been using the analog stereo chorus for a lot of this, but you can get some stereo width out of the mono types in there as well, a couple of different ways. So this LFO phase control is probably the most powerful one in there. And if I set this to 0, it's just going to give me a single modulated delay line in there. If I crank it all the way up to 180, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a split where the left side or the left channel delay is being modulated up and the right channel delay is being modulated down. And this is going to increase our stereo image on here. Let's have a listen to it. 90 degrees also works really nicely on there as well, just to add some stereo width in there. The phase reverse control is also really powerful as well. So if you haven't been listening to this video in stereo so far, this part is going to sound really weird and you're going to hear the chorus disappear. I'm going to do this. I'm going to set the LFO phase to 0 and we'll set the phase reverse to right over here. Now, this is going to give you a massive psychoacoustic effect on here. It's kind of going to sound like the chorus is coming from behind your head. It's really cool. Running that post distortion gives you that immense 80s chungus on there. This digital stereo mode, I think I based off the TC2290 chorus, where the 2290 is a delay, but it can do really short delays and it can also modulate those delays. So a lot of people would use the old 2290 as a chorus unit. And a feature of the 2290 was one of the hardware outputs could be phase reversed on there. So that phase reverse is a really great trick. Another thing you can do with that is like emulate, say, the old ADA MP1, a trick I stumbled across with my old ADA MP1. And I forget where I found it. It might have been from like a Paul Gilbert video or something, was you set the rate to 0, but the depth to 100. So you get this kind of spatial expander effect on there where basically it's a really short delay that's phase reversed and kind of does a similar. So far, we've talked about some fundamentals like what the rate, depth, and delay time do. We've gone into some more advanced features like the LFO phase, the phase reverse, and the auto depth on there. What we haven't talked about are the number of voices. So this is going to control the number of short modulated delays in our chorus effect. And on the axe effects, we can go up to 8 voices on here in the chorus block. I like to think of this as a density control and think of it like a choir where you might have, say, 2 people singing a line in unison that sounds quite full and it's louder than usual. But if you increase the number of people singing or chanting together, you get this massively dense, rich effect in there. And that's why you see the word chorus used for this effect, or you'll see ensemble or symphonic when they're trying to emulate, say, a string section, all these classic chorus effect types. So let's have a listen to the difference between 2, 4, 6, and 8 voices with the same settings on the axe effects. I'm just going to change the channel as I go. Like I said, this is kind of a density or a richness control on here with the stereotypes on here. If you increase the width, you are going to increase, again, the relative spread of these effects on here. So we'll have a listen to the difference between, say, 0 and 100 to get started. I'll cue up 100, but let's hear it at 0. This is basically just going to be straight down the center. There's also the stereo spread control, which can increase the perceived stereo width on there. So a lot of the time, chorus is either used for a very distinct wobbly, bubbly kind of sound, or it's used in a subtle manner to enhance and widen a signal. Now, I normally use it as like a widening or enriching effect on there. I should also mention that if you want a vibrato effect, like let's say we go to a classic chorus like the Japan CE2 based on the Boss CE2, this one sounds really lovely, basically at the stock settings. Perfect for those Alex Lifeson riffs or for 80s new wave. If you turn the mix to 100% on a chorus, you have a vibrato. There's no dry signal in there. So this is just going to give you that wobbly, modulated pitch vibrato sound. And the reason it's a pitch vibrato is as we change the delay time, we're modifying the pitch. That's where that comes from. And I think sometimes where the confusion comes from, where people are like, well, how do they change the pitch in a chorus? It's just a short modulated delay again. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to go. Let's talk about a couple of classic chorus effects. We looked at that Boss CE2 style chorus on there. It's actually worth mentioning before we talk about any others. A Boss CE1, while it was labeled as a stereo chorus effect, what was really happening was if you ran it into, say, two amplifiers, one side would be 100% wet, so it would be a vibrato effect, and the other side would be totally dry. Now, we could emulate this in the Axe effects just by splitting before the two amps, having our vibrato effect, so a chorus with 100% mix on one channel, and then nothing on the other channel. This sounds really cool for that CE1 style sound. But maybe my favorite chorus is another Roland Boss creation. It's the Dimension chorus. So the original Roland Dimension D was a two-space rack mount unit that had 4 buttons. So it took all of the option paralysis out. You just went, do I like mode 1, 2, 3, or 4? And it used the trick where it would have one side of the stereo spectrum being modulated up while the other is being modulated down, so you get this slightly smoother stereo sound. It also applied some filtering and some EQ to the wet signal and the dry signal in there for their Dimension style effect. So they were just really aiming to make things sound wide with that effect. And a lot of people use it in the studio, but it ended up on so many classic recordings as well. Boss later made a pedal called the DC2, the Dimension, and it sounded different to the rack unit, but it had the same kind of layout of just 4 different buttons on there. Now, basically those buttons were like rate and depth presets in there with the different dimension modes. So in the Axe effects, we've got a couple of different dimension modes, but we can apply that dimension mode to any chorus we like. There's a low, medium, and high mode in there. Now, I borrowed an old DC2 pedal and a friend of mine helped me measure it. What we came up with was for the, I think it's like the 3rd mode, which is my favorite. You have the rate just a little bit higher than 0.6 hertz, auto depth off. We've got 2 voices, a low delay time. The depth is quite low on here. And for mode 3, well, it's on the medium dimension mode, but I'll play around with a couple of the other ones. We'll start with it off, then we'll kick it in high, low, and medium on here. This sounds so beautiful on a clean sound. It sounds so awesome on a dirty sound. I love that dimension mode so much after distortion. It is glorious. I also really like a quite low rate and depth on something like a digital stereo chorus, but with the phase reverse kicked in. From memory, this is in the blocks library as the 2290 chorus. So the old TC Electronic rack mount unit that could do very short delays and add modulation to them. So a lot of people, like say John Petrucci, would use them as a chorus. This one sounds pretty mega and wild. Another highly desirable chorus is the old Songbird tri-stereo chorus. Now, there's been various versions of this. You've got the Diatronics version, you've got the full-tone clone out there, you've got several plug-in and digital emulations of this. The stereo tri-chorus is kind of special because it would use 3 delay lines with a 120-degree LFO offset between each of them. So think about some of those stereo Chorii we talked about earlier, where you'd have a 90-degree or a 180-degree LFO offset so that each channel is kind of having the delay time modulated like this. With a stereo tri-chorus, there's a 120-degree offset between each of them. So they're kind of trailing one another. I can't even come up with like a good picture with my fingers to do that. I don't know, maybe I could use my giant nose in the middle there to do that. But 120-degree offset between the 3 delays on there. So the same LFO generating the rate on there. You can tweak the overall depths and the master depth on here, as well as the delay time. This is heard on so many classic 80s recordings, and it was actually developed for, I think the Songbird or the Diatronics was for electric pianos. The idea that, you can make like a kind of vanilla Fender Rhodes sound really lush and gorgeous on a recording. And the old, I think it's the Selena String Ensemble, which was like an old keyboard string machine, had a chorus with similar properties in there. I've got a rack unit called the Synthoma L Chorus, which lets you set up a tri-chorus in a similar manner. There's a demo of it on the channel. A real Diatronics or Songbird or full-tone tri-chorus is one of those unicorns I have just never had my hands on. It's still one of the remaining pieces of vintage rack gear I would really, really like to try. There's a bunch of other classic rack choruses out there like the TC1210 we can talk about in a second. But the stereo tri-chorus, sounds amazing with a super sparkly clean sound. I'm just using this Rockman compressor model in here with the tone cranked up, a little bit of reverb, and then we'll kick some dual detune on top of all of this, which is a related but not identical effect on there. So for that 80s sound, you want tri-chorus or dimension, and you want detune on top of it as well. Fractal have a dual chorus mode, which I really like. It gives you an independent rate and depth on the left and right channels. You can even adjust the right channel delay time to be a ratio of the left channel delay time. There's a master depth and an LFO type on there. I've set this up so that the left channel rate is faster with a lower depth, and the right channel rate is slower with a higher depth. I've also adjusted the right time ratio to 50% of the left time, and we heard much earlier in the video the impact that the delay time can have on there. And we also talked about sort of scaling the depth and rate with one another. Let's have a listen to what this one does. And again, make sure you're listening in stereo. Any way you can modulate a delay, you can create a chorus. So a flanger could also be a chorus as well. What I like about the fractal flanger is it lets you set the minimum and maximum delay times on here, kind of like we did with the delay block over there. If we want that classic chorus effect, we just need to set the feedback to 0 on there. Then we've got rate, depth, we've got our waveform selector over here. We've even got a little monitor for the waveform on there. We can set the LFO phase. We can quantize the LFO. We can set an LFO high cut on there. We've got more options for auto depth on here. And we've got a bunch of advanced controls for the tone on there. So you've kind of got an expanded chorus in here with more options on there in the flanger block. So a really good example would be, say, emulating the old Arian chorus, which a lot of people use for like a Leslie style effect. So feedback at 0, the depth is at around 30%, auto depth is off, triangle waveform. This is great for that kind of Landau style thing. I just like using it instead of a rotary speaker. To do a similar deep dive on the flanger block as well. But again, just keep the feedback at 0, set your minimum and maximum delay time on there, and use all the same tricks that we have used with the chorus block. One more advanced feature in the chorus, which is kind of cool, is this LFO 2 control on here. So I'm going to go to my blocks library and bring up, say, this TC-SCF block on here, which I really like the sound of. Now, what we can do with this second LFO is we can use it to modulate the rate on here. So we can set, say, the LFO2 rate. We could set it, say, to something quite low. We'll set the main rate on here, I don't know, up above 1 hertz on there. We'll crank this depth up. So basically what's going to happen is our chorus, which is a short modulated delay, is in turn going to have the modulation modulated on there. It's just going to result in a slightly more randomized effect, even though it's not truly random. I know it's more unpredictable, put it that way. It's quite a subtle effect. There are other ways to modify this rate in the Axe-Fx using controllers. Like I could attach another LFO to this, so I could sweep it, say, from a really low rate to a really high rate on here. Let's do something from like, 0.2 through to 5 hertz, and I'll set the main controller range on here to run quite slowly on there. So this is like having a variable wobble or a wobbly wobble. It would almost be like if I was playing vibrato on the guitar constantly, and then I changed the speed of my vibrato. Something like that. That's how you can think of this LFO2. Probably one of those parameters that doesn't get touched a lot, but you can use it if you want a more unpredictable sound in there. The other block, which is amazing for chorus effects, is the multitap delay block. There is a 1210 type in here based on the old TC Electronics 1210 chorus, which is another classic 80s chorus. There's also a quad chorus effect type in there, and if you grab my blocks library, you can run 2 multitap delays in parallel and set them to these symphonic A and B settings, and you'll have something that is matched to the old Yamaha SPX90 symphonic chorus. modulating a short delay, we're actually going to end up altering the pitch of that delay repeat on there. It is going to vary though. So it's like the pitch is changing. It's, again, wobbling around. That's why when you have the mix at 100%, the effect is called vibrato. When it's lower than that, it's a dry signal mixed with essentially a variation in pitch, which is called chorus. If you wanted a static pitch shift, you could use the pitch block dual or quad detune modes. A classic setting is 9 cents or 9% of one semitone on one side and going down 9 cents on the other. This is probably my favorite thickening effect in here, and I just kind of use this as my daily driver. I love it. I think this is a fantastic place to pull up stumps. I feel like I've covered most of what you might want to know about the chorus block in the Axe effects and hopefully provided some useful information for you to dial in whatever chorus unit you're using. And please let me know what chorus unit you are using in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you're not sick of listening to chorus by now, you're probably sick of listening to me play guitar. So I'll just say thank you so much. If you like this type of video and you want to support me directly, I make music with my band Ragdoll. Our discography is linked in the video description. I also have a Patreon, which you can sign up to. You can get various perks and you can help keep the lights on and keep my cats fed as well. Until next time, enjoy some greasy chorus guitar tones, and I'll see you then.